let me say a couple of things. So while he gets ready, so we have, so my name is Alfonso Mejia. I'm associate professor at the Pennsylvania State University in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department. So this is the session on trade of the conference of 2020 Conference of Complex Systems. We have 4 presenters, so each presenter, a few rules. Each presenter, you're gonna have 12 minutes to go through your talk, and then a few 3 minutes of questions and answers. For the audience, you should be able to unmute your microphone if you wanna ask questions at the end of a talk, or you can also put a question on the chat room, and I'll make sure that the question gets asked at the end of the presentation. And I think, yeah, those are the rules. And each presenter, you should have co-host rights. So when it's your time to present, you can, just share your own slides and unmute yourself and so on. Okay, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, thank you.
I will let Takayuki Mizuno start the presentation. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, can you watch my slide? Can you see my slide?
I can see your slides. Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I will start the slide.
Thank you for joining this session. My name is Takayuki Mizuno at National Institute of Informatics. My collaborators are Doi, Tsuchiya, and Kurizaki. They are international political scientists. This work is interdisciplinary research on complex international relations. Today, this title is Social Responsible Investing in the Global Ownership Network. This is outline in our talk. First, I would like to talk about connection to the responsible firms through the global economic networks. We will present the data set used in this study. Secondly, by observing the huge global ownership networks, we will show you there are pathways from investment companies to the responsible military firms. Thirdly, we will measure the indirect corporate control power and investment returns of the ultimate owners through the network using network power index and network shareholding ratio. We would like to discuss the balance between corporate control and investment returns for the responsible firms. Finally, we will consider the social responsibility of the fund owners that hides behind the investment companies. Global economic networks have a small world property. We can easily connect with companies around the world. However, there are many responsible companies in the world. Dow Jones has surveyed environmentally responsible companies in the news around the world. There are about 46,000 responsible companies in their dataset. In this example, the Russian company has a responsible flag in their dataset. In this study, by connecting global ownership networks and the adverse media entity produced by Dow Jones, we would like to observe the connection between investment firms and the responsible firms. The 2060 Global Ownership Networks is produced by Bureau van Dijk, includes 49 million listed companies and 100 major shareholders. We can easily supply money to military companies by buying index funds because large military companies include in the major stock indexes. Therefore, we use the U.S. Commerce Department BIS entity list as a list of the responsible military companies that must not be connected. First, in this figure, we investigate short path lengths between major investment companies and the responsible firms with environmental issues. The investment companies connect to about 20,000 responsible firms with environmental issues. Direct connection, direct investment are rare. Many of them are indirectly connected by a couple of links. The bottom figure shows the short path length between major investment companies and responsible military firms. Even in this case, investment companies indirectly connect to 100 irresponsible military firms by a couple of the links. Next, we investigate the flow of investment money into responsible firms using PageRank model. In this model, sales of responsible military firms flow upstream in the ownership network as the following equation. A is shareholding ratio of firm I for firm J. If firm I is responsible military firm, C is sales of firm I. On the other hand, if I is not responsible military firm, C is 0. In the table, these shareholders indirectly get more investment returns from responsible military firm. We notice investment returns from to Russia and Chinese and investment companies. Some of these companies are listed on the stock market. Moscow stock market, Shenzhen stock market, New York stock market. Therefore, our money also flow into them through financial funds that are sold in Japan and US. Here, we would like to consider social responsible investing. Should we stop investing in responsible firms? However, we wouldn't be able to control the responsible firms. On the other hand, should we guide responsible firms to improve? However, we will continue to receive returns from the responsible firms. Which opinion should we choose based on the balance of corporate control and investment return? Therefore, we then measure the indirect corporate control power and indirect investment returns through the ownership network. In order to measure indirect voting power through the network, we introduce NPI. Here, we will consider hidden power of each owner in the majority vote at the shareholding meeting. Majority decision is one of the nonlinear transformation systems. The network power index, NPI, is a measurement of ultimate owner's control to an individual corporate. When we consider this network, Company C can completely control Company A if she controls corporate D with the probability 1 second. In contrast, if Company C fails to control D, she controls A with the probability 1/3, because Company C, B, and D have an equal chance of being critical, because any companies need one additional shareholders to make a decision. Therefore, in total, the probability of C controlling A, NPI, 2/3. In order to measure indirect investment returns through the network, we also introduce NSR. NSR is a very simple definition. A company's revenue is distributed to its shareholders in proportion to their shareholding ratio. Therefore, she gets 10% dividends directly from A and 22.5% indirectly through D. The total NSR from C to A is about 1/3. The NPI is 2/3. So in the relationship between C and A, the power of corporate control is greater than the investment return. If A is a responsible firm, then C should guide A rather than stop investing. This figure shows the relationship between NSR and NPI from major investment companies to the responsible firms. Below the 45-degree line, the control power is less than the investment returns. Therefore, we should stop investing in the responsible firms. On the other hand, above this line, the control power is greater than the investment returns. So we should guide the responsible firms to improve. We investigate whether there are pathways from the listed firms in each stock fund to the responsible military firms. For example, 107 of the 122 funds sold in Japan are connected to the responsible military firms. Due to popularity of passive management, many securities have been included in the stock funds. Most of stock funds are indirectly linked to the responsible military firms. We would like to clarify responsibility of fund owner. The Bank of Japan continues to buy ETFs and is an invisible major shareholder of about 1/3 of Japanese listed firms. Therefore, the Bank of Japan outsources its social responsibility to investment companies. By using network power index, we measure the potential corporate control power of Bank of Japan. We simulate a situation in which the Bank of Japan directly holds stocks. Total NPI from Bank of Japan to the responsible firms with environmental issue is $418 billion. And the total NPI to the responsible military firms is $72 million. This is a summary. In this paper, we use the 2060 ownership network. So updating the data is a future task. Many companies and funds are indirectly linked to the responsible companies. We discussed dilemma for social responsible investing. If we stop investing in the responsible firms, we won't be able to control them. On the other hand, we guide the responsible firms to improve. We will continue to receive return from them. We observed indirect corporate control power and indirect investment returns using network power index and network shareholding ratio. Based on the balance of corporate control and investment return, the ultimate owners should make the decision to invest in the responsible firms. Most fund owners are individual shareholders hidden in investment companies. In order to improve the sustainability of the investment market, the information of the fund owners need to be made public, I think. Thank you for your attention.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Takayuki, for the presentation. I guess we have like 1 or 2 minutes for questions. If anyone in the audience has a question for Takayuki,
Okay.
you can unmute yourself if you have a question and ask the question, or you can post it on the chat. I guess I'll ask a question. I mean, so how do you define the irresponsible companies or firms? And then you mentioned, I mean, you talk a lot about the military irresponsible firms. Yeah.
Yeah. Dow Jones collected the Dow Jones send the newspapers to the market. So Dow Jones collected the responsible list from the newspapers. So in this study, I used collected the responsible data set by collecting Dow Jones.
Oh, okay, sounds great. All right, cool. Okay, so let's go to our next presenter. So next presentation is our presenter is Rosanna Grassi, and so yeah, you can start when you're ready. And I guess she's going to talk about the community structure in the World Trade Network based on communicability distances.
Hello to everybody. And I'm sharing my screen. Okay. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, I can see it. Yeah, looks good.
Okay, thank you. So let's start with my presentation.
Good afternoon, and thank you for giving me the opportunity of sharing my research. Moving to the motivation of the work, it is well known that connections between countries and bilateral trade flows can be modeled as a network of interconnected elements. Community detection in international trade is then an interesting aspect to be investigated. In this framework, we specifically focus on the distance between nodes, where neighbors of a given node are immediately connected to the node, affecting its status most directly. However, more distant nodes can influence this node while passing through intermediary ones. In this work, we focus on two measures of distance or metrics on the network: the strata communicability distance and the vibrational communicability distance. They both go beyond the limits of the immediate interaction between neighbors, and they look simultaneously at all the possible channels of interaction between nodes. The nearest two nodes are image metric, the stronger is their interaction, or, in other words, the higher is the level of communicability between them. We detect communities maximizing a partition quality function that includes the additional information contained in the metric structure of the network. Let's shall a look to the strata communicability and vibrational communicability, the mathematical definition. A classical view in network theory assumes that nodes communicate through shorted paths. Actually, items flow not only through shorted paths, but also through any available routes. Because, for instance, a source node often has not information about the global structure of the network. The communicability between two nodes in a network is a function of the total number of walks connecting them, giving more importance to the shorter than to the longer ones. Formally, the communicability function between two nodes I and j is the ij element of the sum of series of matrix power, where the matrix is the adjacency matrix in case of binary network, or the normalized weighted adjacency matrix in case of weighted network. Of course, series of matrix power must be convergent. The second measure is the vibrational communicability. In the literature, it is well known the definition of vibrational communicability as the Moore-Penrose pseudo-inverse of the Laplacian L+. We define the communicability and resistance distances using this matrix. Note that G II measures the amount of information that starts from and returns to the node I, whereas Gij measures the amount of information transmitted from I to J. Information flow can be any kind of flow along edges, money, current, traffic, and so on. The distance Cij is small when Gij is big, hence when the information flow between nodes I and J is high. At the same time, omega ij is high when I and J do not easily communicate. Vice versa, a low value of omega ij means a high level of communication between nodes. We exploit this matrix in defining the way in which nodes are clustered together. We consider in particular members of the same cluster, nodes whose communicability distance is below a given threshold C0, lying between the minimum and the maximum distances between a couple of nodes. In this way, we construct a new community graph with adjacency matrix M of elements Mij equal to 1 if the distance between I and J is less than or equal to C0, the threshold, and 0 otherwise. In this way, clustered group of nodes that strongly communicate emerge, independence on the threshold C0. And barring the threshold, we obtain different possible partitions of the original network. In order to detect the best possible partition, we use the cohesion measure. We define the cohesion measure. Inspired by the work of Gian and others of 2016, we at first define the cohesion function gamma ij, here where xi bar I and xi bar j is the average distance between I or j and the other nodes, and xi bar is the average distance on the network. So two nodes are said to be cohesive if gamma ij is greater than or equal to 0. That it means they are close to each other and on average they are both far away from the other nodes. Gamma is the gain when positive or the cost when negative related to the grouping of nodes I and j in the same cluster of a given partition. We deal now to the problem of choosing the optimal threshold in order to obtain the best possible partition. We obtain the threshold by solving an optimization problem where the objective function Q represents the global cohesion based on the mutual relative distances between every pairs of nodes. Notice that Q directly includes gamma function ij, and it increases if gamma is a gain or decreases if gamma is a cost. Just to show how our approach works, we show here a simple network of 10 nodes. The network is weighted and very dense. On the right panel, we represent the diagram of the communities in blue and the values of the partition quality function in red, varying the threshold. On the left, we have the communities that naturally arise in correspondence to the maximum value of the objective function. Let's move now to the World Trade Network. Here is a picture of the World Trade Network referred to the year 2016, the last year available. Moving to this network, the network is at first directed and weighted. Each node is a country and weights on links are the total volume of trades between the two countries expressed in $1 billion. Since in-out strand distribution are strongly positively correlated, we perform all the analysis assuming the network as undirected, replacing bilateral links with single age where weight is the average value of weights. In this picture, node size is proportional to strand centrality. Applying our methodology, we obtain the maximum of function Q for C0 equal to 1.392. The optimal partition provides 21 communities. White countries are isolated nodes, the most poor countries in the world. The biggest, depicted in blue, includes all European countries, with Great Britain and Ireland. We note the presence of Morocco, for instance, confirming the positive effect of bilateral trade agreements. Also, some African countries are present due to close economic and cultural ties to some European countries, for instance, France. That community is the second best, where some countries are strongly related, USA and China, or China and Japan, for instance. But our methodology allows to investigate also the inner structure inside each community. For example, the diagram shows the distribution of the communicability distances among every pair of countries in each community in case of the first two communities, community 1 and 2. And table reports some statistics for communities 1 and 2 intracluster and between the two communities intercluster. Notice that community 2 shows slightly more intense interaction than community 1, Europe. However, although the largest number of countries that belongs to community 1, a more compact distribution is observed with a lower volatility. Trading interaction between countries in community 1 appear indeed somehow more homogeneous than between countries in community 2, and this is partially related to the geographical distribution of the countries inside the two communities. Finally, we compare our methodology to others on the same network. Riccardi and Paolo adopt a notion of distance, for instance, among nodes based on random walks on weighted matrix. And Barigozzi and others investigate the quantitative correlation between the word partitioning communities obtained by modularity and geographical distances. What emerges is that geographical proximity still matters for international trade, jointly with socioeconomic factors, of course. But the community structure we find appears more granular than the structure found in the literature, and the composition cannot be explained only by geographical patterns. Concluding, our proposal applies the idea of communicability among nodes to detect different levels of community in the network. The methodology well performed for weighted and dense networks, as the case of World Trade Network. It allows discovering the hidden structure of the network, revealing features and properties of each community, and giving more information about the structure than the classical methods. As a further analysis, the procedure will be extended to multi-layer network. I finish. Thank you for your attention.
Great, yeah, thanks, Rosanna. Are there any questions? We have two minutes for questions. So if anyone in the audience has a question, you can unmute yourself and ask the question, or you can post your question on the chat and I can read it to Rosanna. Yeah, I can ask a question, I guess, in the meantime, in case someone wants to ask another question. So you mentioned at the end you are thinking about applying this to the multi-layer. Have you tried doing that? And oh, okay.
Yes. We are working just in these days to new ideas to extend this measure to multi-layers network, and we are implementing the code with R computing the communicability and both communicability and resistance distances in the function Q in order to obtain the best partition also in the case of World Trade Network divided by sectors, countries and sectors.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that should be very interesting, yeah?
Yes, yes, I agree, I agree. I hope good results, but I cross my finger. Thank
All
you.
right. Yeah, yeah, nice presentation. All right, so
Thanks.
I don't see any other questions in the chat. Okay, we'll move on to our third presentation. Our presenter is José Lages, and he's going to talk about crisis contagion in the World Trade Network.
Hello, everybody. So I will try to share my screen. Okay, so here we go.
So I can see the presentation, but I cannot hear it.
Okay.
I don't know if anyone else is having the same trouble.
Okay. So you can hear it now?
I see it, but yeah,
yes.
no sound. Yeah.
Okay. I don't. Okay. So I'll try to share again. Share computer sound, maybe. Okay, maybe this is. Okay. Let's try again.
Hello, my name is José. I am a
the sound?
theoretical physicist from the University of
Working.
Bourgogne-Franche-Comté in France. Today I would like to present a model of economic crisis contagion in the World Trade Network. This work, achieved with Célestin Coquidé from UBFC and Dima Shepelyansky from Toulouse, has been published in Applied Network Science, which is an open access journal. We use the World Trade Database provided by the United Nations. It contains more for the last 60 years the export and import statistics from about 200 countries and territories and concerning more than 60 types of products. Using this database, we construct the World Trade Network for different years. The money matrix MCC prime P gives the volume of product P flowing from country C prime to country C. Consequently, summing the money matrix components gives you either the volume of product in P imported by a given country C or the volume of product P exported by a given country C. Let us assume a random trader condemned to endlessly wander in the World Trade Network. During its infinite journey, he hops from node to node. The random trade of a product P from country C prime to country C is then proportional to this quantity M divided by V. The Google matrix is constructed using the stochastic matrix obtained from the money matrix elements. So the random surfer or the random trader follows the World Trade Network with the probability alpha, and it follows a given preferential vectors V with the probability 1 minus alpha. The PageRank probability P associated to the Google matrix J is the centrality measure giving naturally the ability of a country C to import the product P. Let us now reverse the direction of all the indirected links of the original World Trade Network. It is then possible to construct the Google matrix G star of the World Trade Network with reversed links. The associated page rank is now called JRank P star. And P star is then the centrality measure, giving naturally the relative ability of, for example, a country C to export the product P. The usual import-export balance of a country obtained by subtracting the total volume export from the total import volume is a very raw estimate of the economic health of a country. By contrast, we define the PageRank-JRank trade balance, hereafter called PCTB, with the help of the country PageRank and JRank probabilities. The PCTB provides a much finer measure of the country balance trade as it takes into account the myriads of chains of complex economic exchanges between any two countries. Countries with negative large PCTB, BC, naturally have to restrain their imports of non-vital goods. These import restrictions can be de facto, as not enough liquidities are available for these countries, or can be imposed by a supranational or federal organization in order to hold back a possible crisis contagion. Our model of crisis contagion is the following one. Let us assume that a country C with BC less than minus kappa goes to bankruptcy. Kappa here is defined positive, and it is what we call the bankruptcy threshold. In this model, the bankrupt countries are prevented to import any products with the exception of petroleum and gas. At the stage 2 equal to 0, we determine the set P0 of countries going to bankruptcy, and then we rewire the World Trade Network accordingly. As an example, for the WTN, the World Trade Network 2016, we give here in magenta color the countries going to bankruptcy at the initial stage 2 equal to 0 for a bankruptcy threshold kappa equal to 0.1. Then at the stage 2 equal to 1, we determine the set B1 of countries going to bankruptcy. We rewire the World Trade Network accordingly, and so on until no more country goes to bankruptcy. The results are the following. Let us look at the number of countries going to bankruptcy at each stage. Here for the 2016 World Trade Network, for the initial stage, we observe that 80% of the countries have initially a negative PCTB, and there is minus 0.3. For 2 equal to 1, the number of countries going to bankruptcy increases to 4, 3, 5, 8, and we reach the saturation for about 2 equal to 10, 11, and no more countries can enter into bankruptcy. We observe clearly a sharp phase transition. The order parameter of this phase transition is kappa, the bankruptcy threshold, above the critical kappa, hereafter called kappa C. The crisis is contained since at the most only about 15% of the countries are affected by the crisis. Below kappa C, the crisis is global. Almost all the countries, more precisely about 90% of the countries, went to bankruptcy at the end of the crisis contagion. If we look now at how long lasts the crisis, we observe that above kappa C, the contagion is fast. At the most, it lasts over 6 stages. Below kappa C, the contagion is slow, more particularly in the vicinity of the phase transition, where it can last up to 18 stages. Looking at the total costs of the crisis, we observe an all or nothing transition. Above capacity, the total cost of the crisis is at most 5% of the total volume of an international trade and drops to 5 per mil around capacity equal to 2, above 2 capacity. Below capacity, the total cost of the crisis is prohibitive since it is about 80 to 90% of the total world trade volume. Consequently, such a figure could help any supranational or federal agency to limit the cost of a crisis induced by the application of austerity policies to indebted countries. Indeed, the calculus of the PCTB allows to select a bankruptcy threshold limiting the crisis cost below a given value. Let us now look at the contagion itself for 2016. For a bankruptcy threshold kappa equal to 0.1, we see at tau equal to 0 that the crisis is triggered by some African countries, mostly sub-Saharan ones, by Central American, Caribbean countries, some European countries such as Slovakia, Slovenia, by some Middle East countries, and some Asian countries. These are the triggers of the crisis contagion for a bankruptcy threshold kappa equal to 0.1 in the World Trade Network 2016. At tau equal to 1, other countries are affected, in particular Panama, some West European countries such as France and Great Britain, and Singapore in Asia. Tau equal to 2, the crisis attains now North America, the US and Canada, and propagates in almost all the leading European economies. At tau equal to 3, the previous fall of the US brings down the leading economies of Asia, such as China, Japan, Korea, India, and also here Australia. At tau equal to 4, the crisis is now global in Europe, and so on. After 10 iterations, the contagion is stopped and is worldwide. If we focus on trade exchanges bigger than 10 billions of US dollars, we observe the economic relations between the big economies. With an hierarchical layout, we easily determine which country is responsible for the fall of the next one. We observe that European countries and Singapore here for 2016 are the patient zero of the crisis contagion. Then the crisis spreads in the rest of the Europe and affects the US, and then the Asia. Then Asian economies, Russia and Australia are here in this example the last countries to fall. The indirect trade exchanges dependencies between countries. The World Trade Network contagion model mimics the cascade of country bankruptcies, either due to a lack of liquidities or decided by a supranational or federal economic authority trying to contain a crisis contagion. The successive bankruptcies of economies induce a rewiring of the World Trade Network, which possibly weaken other economies. Two phases for kappa bigger than kappa C, a contained fast and low cost crisis phase, and for kappa below kappa C, a global, slow and high cost crisis phase. The World Trade Network contagion model allows to follow different crisis contagion scenarios. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, thanks, Jose. Are there any questions from the audience? We have a couple of minutes for questions, 1 or 2 minutes. So if you have any question, please let Jose know. Ask Jose your question. So I guess I can ask a question. So did you try looking at the 2007 2008 financial crisis and comparing maybe against the simulations?
The 2008 crisis?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, we look at this particular year, yes, and we see the effects of the real crisis, yes, yes. If it was your question,
Yes, my question was exactly that, and I'm wondering whether how was the comparison between the simulation based on the contagion model and what actually happened during that crisis.
Yeah, we found some results which corroborates our method, yes, but we did not study this in detail. But indeed, it works with the 2008. We saw some particular features which is in concordance with reality.
Okay. Yeah, there's one more question in the chat, I guess. So the question is, have you drawn predictions for the current crisis?
Okay. The current right now, yes. Not yet, no. And also we use the UN database, which is okay. It is the exchanges between countries, but maybe we should. It is another step forward. We should use another type of database, which are the input-output database, where you can see the exchange of the exchange of money from different sectors of activity. It would be interesting to look at such a database, and maybe yes, we can try to draw some prediction for the current crisis.
Great. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Thank you for the presentation.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So our last presenter is Michael Gomez. He's going to talk about shock diffusion in a multi-layer supply chain network. Yeah. Okay, Mike, you can get started when you're ready.
Hi, Alfonso. Thanks for sharing the session. Yeah. Can I share my screen? I think I need. Okay. So I'm sharing my screen now. Can you see my screen?
No, not yet.
Oh. There?
Now, yeah. Now I can see it. Yep.
Okay, I'm just gonna start the presentation now. Hello, everyone. Thanks for attending this presentation. Today, I will talk about shock diffusion in a multi-layer supply chain network. This work is part of my doctoral studies in the Pennsylvania State University with the advice of Professor Alfonso Mejia. The current COVID pandemic has exposed serious issues with the structure of supply chains for a variety of goods. For instance, in the United States, during the summer of this year, there was a shortage of several goods, with one of them being meat products, as we see in the image on the left. The shortage of meat products in supermarkets was a consequence of a COVID-19 outbreak among employees in some of the biggest meat processing plants in the country that together account for a large proportion of the total US meat production. The COVID-19 pandemic is just one example of an exogenous shock that can disrupt supply chains. Other shocks that have the potential to disrupt supply chains are geopolitical events, economic recessions, and extreme climate events, such as floods and droughts. The main objective of this study, to keep it nice and simple, is to explore the propagation and response of international supply chains to exogenous shocks. And to do this, we use data on input-output relationships for the continental US. And with this input-output data, we built a multi-layer network of economic flows across regions and sectors. And then to model the propagation of shocks in the multi-layer network, we use a cascade model that simulates a shock that starts in one node and is propagated to other nodes following supply chains. The main data for this study is a multi-regional input-output dataset that was recently developed and published by Garcia and collaborators. This dataset maps domestic flows of economic goods and services in US dollars across regions and sectors in the United States economy for the year 2012. The dataset divides the continental United States into 115 different geographic regions, including 65 major cities, which are shown in green and blue in the map on the left, and 50 remainders of states, which are shown in gray. Additionally, the dataset accounts for 37 different types of economic sectors that include 8 food-related sectors such as meat and meal grains, and 23 industrial or manufacturing sectors, and 6 services sectors such as food services and government services. We represent the multi-regional input-output dataset as a weighted and directed multi-layer network as shown in the figure. In our multi-layer network, layers are or represent economic sectors, and nodes in each layer represent geographic regions for that sector. The edges in the network are both directed and weighted, where the weights represent the economic flows in US dollars. We have two types of edges. First, we have intralayer edge flows that go from one region to another within the same sector, and interlayer flows that go from one region to the same one on another sector. Next, to simulate shocks in the multi-layer supply chain network, we implement a network cascade model. And to do this, first we define a vector f that indicates the failure state of all 4,255 nodes in the multi-layer network. And node I in a layer alpha has a value of f equal 1 if the node has collapsed and 0 otherwise. Then, at time t equals 0, we initiate the cascade process by setting the state of the source node S in a layer alpha to 1. Next, inflows and outflows of the source node are reduced by a fraction c that it's in the range from 0 to 1, and this is equivalent to saying that the supply and demand of goods and services for that source node decrease due to the shock. Therefore, c sets the magnitude of the shock. This also implies that all neighbors of the source node are affected by the shock as well. Following that, for each of the neighbors of the source node, we evaluate if the change in total flow caused by the shock is larger than a fraction b of its total economic production. If this condition is true, then the failure state of that neighboring node is set to 1. Then the parameter b determines the capacity of a neighboring node to buffer or resist the shock originating in the source node. In the next time step at t equals 1, nodes that were identified as collapse at t equals 0 decrease their inflows and outflows by a fraction c, and then the shock continues to propagate. Finally, the cascade process continues until there are no more collapsed nodes during a time step. There are two measures that are especially important in the analysis we do in this study. First, the avalanche size is noted by the capital letter V, and it is computed as the fraction of the total number of nodes that collapsed during the cascade. So for a shock to the source node S in layer alpha, the avalanche size V is computed as in the first equation, where we sum the failure states F across time steps T, nodes I, and layers beta. And then we divide that by M, which is the total number of nodes in the multilayer network, which is 4,255. Another important measure is the failure threshold omega, which is defined as the ratio between model parameters B and C. Remember that B denotes the capacity of nodes to resist shocks, whereas C denotes the magnitude of or severity of the shock. Therefore, lower values of omega mean that the shock severity dominates the buffering capacity of nodes and leads to larger avalanche sizes. To illustrate the shock propagation process, I have put together an animation of a simulation with a failure threshold omega equals 0.04, where the shock starts at the government services sector of New York City. The color of the regions in the map correspond to the number of impacted sectors in that region, with a darker red color meaning that more sectors are impacted. We can see that at the beginning of the simulation, the shock spreads to a region close to New York City, whereas the cascade continues, the shock spreads to the central United States, and later the shock becomes widespread, affecting every region in the United States. This is only one of the simulations that we performed in this study, but for the complete analysis, we independently simulate shocks to each node in the multilayer network for a range of omega values. Now, moving on to the results section of the study, we show here the average avalanche size for a simulation with a failure threshold of omega equals 0.04, both by geographic regions, shown on top on the figure on top, and by economic sectors or layers, shown in the figure in the bottom. In the analysis by regions, we see that regions that produce on average larger avalanche sizes are varied. For example, the 30 regions with the highest average avalanche size include breadbasket regions such as the state of California and Iowa, large cities such as Chicago and Miami, manufacturing hubs such as Milwaukee and the rest of Mississippi, and trade hubs such as Buffalo and New Orleans. In terms of economic sectors, we see that layers with the highest average avalanche sizes are dominated by food-related and service sectors. In fact, the top 17 layers with the highest average avalanche size consist of food-related and service sectors, with the only exception being pharmaceuticals, tobacco, and transportation equipment. These results are similar for other values of omega. Next, we explore the response of supply chains in terms of avalanche size to different values of the failure threshold omega. For this analysis, we performed a shock simulation for each node in the network for values of omega ranging from 0.02 to 0.20. Here, in this figure, I am showing the variation of the avalanche size for different values of omega for four layers, which are the meat, government services, pharmaceuticals, and retailer layers. In each plot, the lines represent the relationship between the avalanche size and omega for each region in that layer. Therefore, in each plot, we have 115 different lines. We found that for each node in the multilayer network, the avalanche size exhibits a threshold-like behavior with respect to omega. Take the example of the mid layer, shown in the top left panel, where the avalanche size is small or negligible for omega values larger or equal than 0.08, but rises relatively quickly for omega values less than 0.08, indicating that below this omega value, shocks lead to catastrophic failures And we can observe that there is a similar threshold-like behavior for nodes belonging to the other three layers shown in this figure. And this holds true for all other layers in the multi-layer network. Now, since the supply chains reveal a threshold-like response to shocks, the critical value of omega below which large cascades occur can be used to quantify the overall fragility level of a node. The critical value is referred to as omega sub c. Regions with larger omega sub c generate larger cascades for a high failure threshold and are therefore more fragile. We use omega sub c to rank the overall fragility of regions and sectors. The map on the right shows a ranking based on the fragility level omega sub c. It can be observed that regions with the highest fragility rank tend to be located in the central United States. This region contains some of the largest producers of food-related products. We also use omega sub c to distinguish between high and low fragility layers. Based on omega sub c, we can see on the plot on the right that there are three different groups of layers that are identified as having, on average, a high fragility. These are chemicals and pharmaceuticals, services, and food-related sectors. These regions and sectors with larger omega sub c are more likely to produce larger avalanches for a wide range of omega values. So to conclude, we used a multi-layer network based on multi-regional input-output data to represent supply chains in the United States. And along with a network cascade model, we explored the propagation of economic shocks in the supply chains. Based on our simulation, we found that the impact of a shock varies widely depending on the source node. Second, we also found that the response of supply chains to shock reveal a threshold-like behavior. Third, we found that the most fragile regions tend to be located in the central United States. And lastly, we found that the most fragile layers fall into three groups, which are food-related products, chemical and pharmaceutical products, and services. And these are all layers that were disrupted during the COVID-19 pandemic. So lastly, this work was published in the Applied Network Science Journal. So if you want to get more details about the study, you can go to the reference listed here. Thank you very much for your attention.
All right, yeah, thank you, Mike, for the presentation. We have maybe 1 minute, maybe for one question, if anyone has a question for Mike.
Hi, great talk, really interesting. Do you have any idea why some of the regions that are very, very fragile are right adjacent to areas that are not fragile at all?
Are located where?
Regions that are adjacent to regions that show an opposite behavior. Like if you go back to the
like here?
left side, yes. Some of them are like really fragile, like say around sort of Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and some of them are not fragile at all. Or also like North Dakota and Montana look very different.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I would say that the reason is mainly because of trade trade relationships. So, for instance, these regions in the central United States, they focus more on producing food-related products, and they heavily produce these type of products. So, and whereas regions here in places like here in the Northwest are not as they do not trade as much as regions in this area. Therefore, these regions that are that trade a lot, then they tend to be more fragile than others, because mainly they are more connected to other places, and therefore are more exposed to shocks that start in other sectors than regions that are less connected. If that answers your question.
Yeah, my question was a little bit, why is Montana so different from North Dakota? Because if you drive across the border there, it just looks the same and very similar industries and so on.
Yeah, well, I would have to look at that in more detail. But yeah, probably the trade relationships between those two regions are a bit different according to our input-output data set.
Thank you, and really cool stuff.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you everyone for joining the session. Make sure to follow up with the speakers, the presenters, if you have any additional questions. But that was the last of our presentation, so we are done with this session. Thank you everyone for joining, and yeah, congratulations to the presenters for their presentations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.